Welcome back to another episode of Growth Marketers Podcast. I'm Samuel Timothy.
And I'm Taylor Rowe. This is another installment of our Best in Class series where we dive into the key characteristics of best in class organizations from a marketing and sales perspective. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode around the mindset of these types of organizations, I think it's a good place to start. But if not, it's fine. You can dive right in. Today we're talking about marketing specifically and what best in class organizations are doing from a marketing standpoint. Please give us a like, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, share it with a friend or a colleague. Let's dive right in.
So Taylor, I know we're in a series called the Best in Class Companies, and if you haven't already heard our previous episode, please go listen to the first episode where we talked a little bit about the mindset and approach the best in class companies follow, and we're in that same series. Today we're talking about marketing. So Taylor, do you want to take it away in terms of talking about how the best in class companies, especially the high performing best in class companies, what do they do from a marketing standpoint?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of characteristics that lead a company to be included in what we call best in class. So we're going to break it down kind of by the marketing department and look at things like the team structure, the strategy, what they're looking at in terms of reporting, what their tech stack looks like. What are these organizations doing internally and externally from a marketing perspective that makes them so successful? So let's start with the team structure, because at the end of the day, we're only as good as our employees and our team. When it comes down to creating the strategy and, of course, executing, it's making sure that we have the right team. And one important note that I want to make sure that we acknowledge is, for us, it's less about the titles, right? When you look at hiring and building out your marketing team, it's less about the actual titles and more about the actual function that person holds or that position entails. So we've done previous episodes around building your marketing team and what makes a successful marketing team. But there's a few main components, 4 main components that we believe every successful best-in-class marketing organization holds. So the first one is the visionary, that leader. Typically, if we do want to look at titles, it's the actual CMO, right, or the VP of marketing. That visionary is the idea person. Second would be somebody that is technically adept at implementing, right? So, and this is just one function, right? So you could say technical implementer could be marketing automation specialist. It could be a developer, could be a designer, could be a technical writer, right? So you have that visionary that kind of leads that strategy and looks at big picture. And then the next person is, you need somebody technically sound to actually implement in each of those areas. And a lot of times when we see marketing organizations being built from the ground up, one of those first hires outside of that CMO is, they call it a marketing specialist or marketing, really what it is, marketing generalist, right? Where they look for somebody who's a jack of all trades, who can do design and copywriting and has some development experience and knows SEO and can manage paid campaigns. In reality, while you might need that kind of a Swiss Army knife early on to build your organization because budgetary concerns, but a lot of times the salary for that position, the skill set that's required, don't really align with what you're trying to accomplish, right? We've seen a lot of times where companies are looking to hire somebody fresh out of college or 1 or 2 years experience that can handle and juggle all those things, and you really need some technical expertise in each of those areas to excel. Again, we're talking about best in class, and what does that look like? It doesn't look like one person doing a 5 or 6 person job. It looks like hiring specialists to excel at their specialty. So the next key piece of that team is what we call the coordinator, right? So we have this big picture visionary leader. Typically, that person or that function is consistently innovating and looking at new ideas and trying to move forward with the program. But we need somebody who is great at organization, great at change management, we need to make sure that we have that project coordinator, that project manager that can ensure things are moving along, that can prioritize, that can focus on the right things to do and say no to the wrong things to do and stay disciplined so that, again, we can continuously move towards perfection. And then, of course, we have what we call the enabler, right, which comes down to somebody in a relatively newer term, which is marketing operations, right? And what that means is how does this wheel turn, right? How does this whole engine, how does this system work? Well, you're going to need somebody with marketing operations specialty that can build systems, that can look at the overall architecture of all of our technologies, our workflows, how things are progressing, how we operate from a marketing perspective, and try to build efficiencies, right? Build automation where it makes sense, make sure that we have the right marketing automation technologies in place, make the lives of the marketers easier, give them more insights into what's happening, and overall, again, be kind of the grease, if you will, that helps the wheel turn. So to kind of recap that team structure, and then, Sam, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. The visionary leader, the technical implementer, the coordinator, and then the enabler.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe this would be the difference between a thinker versus doer concept as well, right? Because I think a lot of times, like you said, especially as the marketing department is getting built, they make that first hire, and oftentimes they're kind of the visionary and also the doer. And then every time they hire someone else, then you have like this indefinite delegation problem, right? You just delegate to one person, that delegates to the next person, and nothing ever gets done because you just keep delegating. But if you don't have that specialist breakout, right, like you said, the visionary that actually is coming up with all the ideas and have the big picture goal, and then at the same time you have specialists who can actually own specific components of whatever needs to get done, and then you have someone who's going to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation, that this overseeing the entire the process of production of it. Last but not least is somebody who can actually make sure that all of these things can be implemented in an efficient way. So I think the thinker versus doer is probably the easiest way to put it. Mm-hmm. As the organization size changes, obviously there's going to be a lot more of these team members needed to be added. So I guess that would be the most next logical question, like how many of these people would you need to really build a best-in-class marketing department, and is there some sort of a relation to the company size versus just the overall department size?
Yep. Yeah, and that's an important clarification, right, is that, while these are four main, functions within that marketing department, it's not necessarily saying that, you only need four people, right? This could just be on your content team, right? We've talked about this in the past, but a lot of organizations say, well, we need to create more content, so they'll hire one person, right? They'll hire a copywriter, or they'll hire someone to make videos, and you don't really realize how many moving parts there are, right? Again, thinkers versus doers. Well, the strategy of what type of content do we want to create in relation to our buyer personas and which stage of the buyer's journey they are in. How is that content going to be distributed? What are the goals with this content? How are we measuring success? Those are all kind of the visionary characteristics. And then each of those individual activities requires technical specialists. Well, we need somebody to do keyword research and technical optimization or on-page optimization of any written content or written text. That person might not be the same person that is the creative in terms of writing, right? A content writer, a copywriter specialist, somebody who's writing that content. Then from there, you might need designers to design pages, or we might need developers to develop new pages on the website, new content on the website. Other specialists include, again, promoting that content. Are we spending money on paid advertisements? Do we have partnerships? Do we have a PR team or PR department? So there's a lot of different specialists, and then it comes down to, again, those coordinators and those enablers to make sure that we have the right schedule, that we're getting things done, that we're coordinating interviews with subject matter experts. If we're creating a video, do we have to hire outsourced video department to come in? Who's editing the video? From a marketing and automation and marketing operations perspective, again, what are we doing with these leads as they come in, or how are we measuring success? How are we reporting on all of these different moving parts and campaigns? What can we do to, again, make those lives of those marketers easier? So that's just one piece of, or one tactic, right, in terms of content creation. So you could look at that across your entire department and kind of realize there's a lot of different functionalities and different specialties that you need. And that's where it comes down to, as you said, what makes sense to do internally versus externally based on both your marketing strategy and how frequently you're executing these types of campaigns, as well as your overall, team size, company size, revenue. You need I would say best in class companies have a goal or a target in terms of their headcount in relation to revenue, right? What does that look like if we're a $10 million company today and, we aim to be a $15 million company a year from now? How does our marketing team grow and evolve from there? What changes? And, if we're a $100 million company and we want to be a $200 million company, what changes, from there? So we should have answers for those type of questions in relation to, again, what we hope to execute, where we need specialists, what makes sense for us to hire internally, what makes sense for us to, outsource to an agency or contractors.
Yeah, I think like how you opened the segment by saying like it's not about the title, it's about the function. So we're not advocating for the number of headcount based on like all the different tiers that you would have, like the CMO, the VP, the director, and the manager, and then the actual people who do the job, right? We're not advocating for any sort of an organization structure at all. We're just talking about from a functional standpoint, who are all the team members that you're going to need to actually execute at an optimal level. And also, we're going to get into the strategy in a second, but that strategy is also going to dictate the type of resources that are going to be needed. So if you're going to be leading with a lot of organic reach, then you're going to need a lot more team members that are producing content and promoting content and getting as much visibility and managing the community and engagement on social platforms. So all of those things cannot be just one person's responsibility. They're going to come a time you're going to need different team members or specialists that are just really honing in on those areas. Like you said, the analogy of a Swiss Army knife, it's very hard to find people that are so skilled in content creation and also optimization and also video and also creative. Right. All of those things just not going to happen in one person. So you also need to be somewhat realistic about the skill set of the team internally you have, and also, like you said earlier, in terms of what you're willing to pay for a specialist if they actually do have a variety of skills that they can bring to the table as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, even if you find that person, just because they can do all of those things doesn't mean they should, right? Because, again, it's still, how much can you get done? How much can you move forward if you're wearing all those hats and you're doing all that work, right? If you're doing all those components. And we talk about a lot in other podcasts the compounding effect of motion when it comes to marketing, right? Meaning the faster velocity we can get these campaign strategies, ads, whatever it may be in relation to your marketing pumped out, the faster we can learn, the faster we can improve, the faster we can iterate. So if you're trying to save budget by having one person wear multiple hats, and that from that perspective, the opportunity cost could be far greater than the cost of hiring a couple of extra headcount. And I think the same is true for outsourcing to an agency, right? If you're sitting there thinking, well, yeah, I can't hire all these people internally, so I'm going to find one person and outsource my entire marketing, again, strategy, execution, content creation, reporting, automation, marketing operations, all these type of things just to one agency. You have to look at that as well and say, how is my budget for one, relative to what I'm asking this agency to do, and then what does their team structure look like, right? How can they accomplish this externally, but I can't accomplish it internally? So the best in class companies that we've seen in terms of that team structure understand all the components that it takes to be successful and account for that, right? It really comes down to that, is we're being realistic with what is required and what is done in-house versus outsourced. It looks a little bit different for every company, because some companies their strategies are more heavily focused on advertisements. Some are more focused on subject matter experts being that mouthpiece or that voice for the organization. So they need to be in front of the camera, they need to be on podcasts, or they need to be at speaking engagements, right? So how do we then scale that person's time? And then they build team members around, again, video creation, content creation, and coordination, PR of in-person events, speaking events, podcast hosting, all those kind of things. So you just need to understand what you're trying to accomplish. And I think, again, putting that visionary, that leader is the first step. And then really being realistic with all the components that are necessary to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, one thought that just came to my mind, like you and I sit here and do this podcast, but there's an army of team members that actually have to make things happen.
Right.
Even with having so many team members, we are not even able to keep it at a consistent pace to get things published, right? So we're doing these videos, then someone actually goes and edits the full-length version of it, and then there's another team member that actually makes them into shorts. Then they have to get all these, shared on all the social platforms. Then we have someone actually does the transcripts and then turns it into a blog post and embeds the long form piece there. And then all sorts of other things that happens behind the scene to make these things go live. And then obviously a podcast version of it, which is an audio file that gets shared on, Spotify and everywhere else. So there's so many moving parts. This is just one form of content that we're creating and the amount of resources that are needed to actually get this out.
Right.
So imagine that you're trying to do this, and especially if you're an organization that has different divisions, and if you have different product lines and you're trying to target different industries, all of those actually just increases the magnitude of complexity that your marketing team need to attain.
Sure. Okay, perfect. Well, I think we've covered the team structure. So let's move on to the next kind of logical piece, which is, okay, we have the people in place, and how do we get the right strategy in place? What's the, people often ask, what's the best channel for my industry, or what's the right strategy for me? So Sam, what are the key components that best-in-class organizations have when it comes to creating and developing that strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is having a documented plan. Oftentimes, I think they have some sort of a big picture idea, and they have just random active marketing that they normally go about doing. But I think the overall goal of a marketing strategy is, do we have some sort of a documented plan that includes where are we right now, where are we trying to get to, and what are the measurements that we're going to use to see that we're achieving the goal that we set out to do. So I think the strategy is a lot more than just a channel. It's more so about who's our ideal customer profile, where do they congregate for information, what sort of a content or asset are we going to leverage to reach them wherever they are in their purchase journey, and ultimately how are we going to move them from their the entire customer journey to become a buyer, right? Become a customer for our product or service. So having that documented is what I think it matters. You can get all fancy and crazy with it, but at the end of the day, it just need to be somewhere solidified. Everybody agrees on this is exactly what we're trying to. This is the playbook that we're going to use to achieve the goal that we're trying to go after.
Yeah, I agree with that. And obviously, what was it, Ben Franklin, right? The plan is planning to fail, right? And I think that's true with most things that you do. But when it comes to marketing and digital marketing, in specifically digital marketing, we see this a lot because, again, I just talked about, right, the compounding effect of marketing and the importance of speed to market, so to speak, and getting things out quickly. And sometimes that can, almost be too much, right? And like you said, a lot of marketing tactics, but no real marketing strategy. So I think there's a lot of value in developing a comprehensive strategy and, really trying to poke holes in it, right? Trying to shoot down your strategy, question every piece of it. Well, if we have goals around traffic numbers or lead generation numbers or affected pipeline that we're trying to create, how are we going to get there, right? We can't just have goals or numbers for the sake of numbers. And we see that a lot, pressure coming down from leadership into the marketing department. Hey, we had X number of leads last month or last quarter or last year, so we need 20% more than that. Well, why? What's happening with those leads? Why are they converting at whatever rate? What are we defining as a lead? Where is the traffic going to come from? Does that make sense based on our cost per impression or cost per click or cost per lead or whatever it may be in the past, right? So really, really evaluating and almost questioning everything as you develop the strategy is going to force you to get creative and find solutions. And now, of course, everything is a little bit, hypothetical until you start executing. But at the very least, you should have you should take a scientific approach in the sense of, here's our plan, here's what we expect to invest, here's what we expect in terms of results, almost, kind of our hypothesis, so to speak, of what we think should happen, and measure against that as a benchmark, right? Measure against previous results as a benchmark. And then again, question everything in terms of the results. Why is this happening? Why do we think this is happening? What can we find out about, how to improve these different types of strategies? So every single component of the strategy should be well thought through. Who's executing? What are we expecting? What's the impact of this piece of content, this, part of the strategy? Who are we trying to get in front of? What is the value of this piece of content? What are we expecting our potential customer to do once they read this content or consume this content? How are we expecting them to feel? So all of that should really be thought out before we even start, spending money or spending energy trying to execute.
Yeah, it's something that we say sometimes internally in our organization is like, no one wakes up every morning and say, hey, I want to buy more SEO or I want to buy more PPC. The overarching goal is, hey, how do I increase the number of customers that we have? And then what are all the leading indicators that I need to measure to know that I'm actually going to achieve that goal? I mean, people always say sales is a numbers game, so is marketing. If you have the right sort of tactics and you execute it at a certain frequency, you can expect a certain sort of an outcome, right? But I think overall, it's not also just the tactic, right? Like I think a lot of times people just check off the list, like, oh, we are doing SEO, and we oftentimes have conversations with people that they think technology is a strategy, where they bought a HubSpot or some sort of a software, and then think that, oh, now that we have HubSpot, then we got that checked off, and we're doing campaigns and whatnot, right? So, but it is definitely like what you just said, Taylor, essentially understanding where we are as a company and where we're trying to go to, and then are all these things that we're planning to do is really going to make the needle move, or are we just doing busy activities for the sake of doing a bunch of things? Because we've seen that time and time again. They're blogging, but they're blogging about all kinds of random topics, and it clearly doesn't do anything to the organization. Then the leadership complains, why are we wasting time on blogging? And then you write off blogging as an overarching strategy is not going to work. All right, like those sort of things cannot happen. You really need to be extremely careful about the actual efforts that you are putting into it, and is it really the right sort of a messaging or the channel or even the tactic, right? Like a lot of times I think even the channel could be a big issue as well. A lot of times people say, oh, social media doesn't work for us, and then they write off social media as a strategy and then call it a day. But essentially you need to know, are my audience on that platform, and is this the right medium for me to reach them? If not, just don't say social media is the reason, is not going to work for us. And we've seen time and time again, especially on those legacy industries that are industrial and manufacturing companies, oftentimes write off digital marketing as a whole thing, as our customers and our engineers are not online, so they're not going to go buy it. But part of the reason being, like you said, Taylor, they never had any historical performance. There's no historical ways to prove that they had any success because they've never done anything. So they're just going to say, hey, this digital marketing medium doesn't work for us. So that's also another mistake that we've seen when it comes to strategy. And they're still, kind of holding on to some of the traditional mediums or approaches for their overall marketing strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned a couple of great points there, writing off entire strategies or channels for lack of success. And I think that comes back to the importance of developing that strategy, and again being scientific with that approach. You should be confident in the strategy of a couple of things. One is you should really know who your customers are, right? So if you know who your customers are and you understand how they make buying decisions, how they learn about your product or solution, right? Are they problem aware or are they solution aware, right? The maturity of your market. Meaning, is this a new product category, or is this, is this a disruption to a, existing category, or a change of the way that, people are processing, completing certain processes or technologies that they're using, or is this I don't want to say commoditized, but is this a commoditized, market where people know exactly what it is? They change vendors or solution providers frequently, and they may go online and search, right? Because ultimately that's going to come down to our strategy around, are we creating awareness and demand, generating demand? Are we capturing existing demand? Where are we pushing and pulling, so to speak, and where are we spending our efforts. So the reason I say that is because then you get down to that piece of individual channels, right? And we say, okay, we know our audience is on LinkedIn, and we know this is the type of information we're trying to get in front of them. Then ultimately, that's where the testing begins, right? So we're testing organic versus paid. We're testing different strategies within each of those. So if we're looking at paid, obviously the creatives, the targeting, the bids, the landing page, the offer, the messaging. We might believe that a certain messaging resonates with our audience, or we might believe that a customer chooses to work with us because of A, B, or C, but it's really something completely different. So all of those need to be tested. We can't say, hey, we're going to spend X number of dollars on LinkedIn or Facebook, and then it didn't work, right? So to speak. What does work mean? That's another piece which we'll talk about in terms of reporting. But then write that entire channel off, right? What are the variables that are necessary to really fine tune in order to see success? Comes down to organic as well. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, like individual activities. One LinkedIn post is not going to change the trajectory of your organization, right? But it is the consistency of that discipline to continue to post and engage and interact with customers that may have an impact, right? So it comes back to having the right strategy, understanding those variables, and then being agile within that framework, right? Don't be married to one strategy. Like, we're not saying, hey, don't write off a channel, but make sure if you're willing to invest in a particular channel and you feel confident enough to invest budget, time, effort, whatever that may be, then make sure you exhaust and look at every angle, and then be quick to make that decision that, hey, we need to change. Or if we're seeing more success in one channel, right, we're saying, hey, we have 4 or 5 different strategies that we believe can and will be successful, but one of them is 10 times more successful right now, then sure, be agile and shift into that market and lean into that and double down in that if that makes sense for you. But it comes back to having a framework, having a strategy in place, having some things that we can measure against, and then continuously improving that, right? Continuously revisiting that strategy, making sure that it's the right strategy. So we've seen both of those in terms of failures, right? Of it's like we have this great strategy and then it's going to be set in stone and we're going to just do this for the next 5 years. We hear sometimes we talk about best in class companies, but worst in class companies, we see that a lot. It's like, hey, we're going to explore this channel in 2024 or 2025, right? Or we're going to redo the website in 2027. It's like some of those such long-term strategies so far out that it's not even worth talking about because of the rate that things change so quickly when it comes to marketing. So I think best-in-class companies know what they're trying to do, and they have their best documented strategy in place in order to get where they want to go. But they're constantly revisiting that and trying to improve it.
Yeah, and I think in our episode 1, we talked a little bit about the mindset, again, about some of these areas. That the willingness to test things and willingness to also pivot as things happens, right? But not to always use the fitness analogy, but I do think that if you're in fitness, you don't just do cardio and you just don't keep running and just try to get in shape, right? Like there's a lot of variables in getting in shape, right? So you have to lift weight and you have to have, eating right and exercising and do all those things. And you cannot just write off cardio, or you cannot just say, just do cardio. I think that is just one good principle to keep in mind across any sort of marketing initiatives. And also just keep in mind, like sometimes, I know science always changes as well. Like science come and say, oh, and now you can drink sugar, eat sugar and still stay in shape and whatnot. I mean, there's so many changes happen. Like even just recently, I heard that Facebook actually has becoming more profitable for some advertisers because they've actually started to make changes in their algorithms, so people are able to reach people on Facebook. So I know there was a little time before everybody said, "Oh, Facebook is done. You can't get back to Facebook anymore." There's no reason for spending money on Facebook ads. But I think there's always going to be shifts that are happening that forces platforms to change their algorithm, their overall targeting criterias, and then they might give you more leeway to advertise or market on those platforms. So even if you had not succeeded on a certain platform in the past, there might be opportunity for you to go back and do some other experiments. And oftentimes, we often tell our customers too, like your messaging, your offer, your targeting, your creative, all of those are also part of the equation too. So it's not just the platform was bad, but there's a lot of other variables that you need to keep in mind as well.
All right, so we talked about what it takes for best-in-class companies in terms of the team structure, having the right team, and then developing and executing that strategy. Next week, we'll talk about what best-in-class companies are doing in relation to their reporting, their technology stack, what tech stack they're using, how that tech stack is enabling their marketing team and their sales department to succeed. We'll talk about horror stories of good versus bad companies. And then we'll get into driving results and what it means to drive results as a best-in-class organization, and some key insights and secrets that we see from best-in-class companies every day on how they're driving results for their organization. So thanks for joining us. Please tune in next week. If you like, please give us a like and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Share it with a friend or a colleague. And thanks again.
Growth Marketers is brought to you by OneIMS, helping you reach new heights through integrated marketing. One world, one web, one IMS.